So we're starting with the rook. Now in this position, right? So we all know that the rook moves in a cross shape, right? From our previous lesson, which is straight, left, downwards, and right. So this is a cross shape. Now the rook from any position can, as long as there's no like officer in front of it, it can move. It can keep on moving. Now the rook can't jump over pieces to capture. So let's just assume there was an officer over here. Now we can't jump, right? We can't jump this officer to capture this pawn. So now we're going to use the rook to capture each of these pieces: the bishop, the queen, the knight, and the pawn. Now, how can you do this? First, the rook can go here straight, and then it can capture the pawn. Now the next piece we're going to be capturing is the queen. So how can the rook capture the queen? Now the rook can't move in an L shape, so it can't capture the queen from where it is, right? The rook can't capture the queen from where it is. It moves only straight, and which is vertically and horizontally. Vertically and horizontally. So how can the rook over here capture the queen? Now the rook has to take a turn. There are two ways the rook can capture the queen. It's either you take a turn, move one step towards the left, and then capture the queen, right? Or the rook can move straight, then capture the queen, or the rook can move straight and then capture the queen. So any of the two works. So now we're going to just go with this. Now the rook comes here and the rook captures the queen. Now the next piece we want to capture is the knight. So can we capture the knight from here? Yes, obviously, because the rook moves straight and the rook here is attacking the knight, so he can capture directly. Now the next piece we want to capture is the bishop. We have two moves to capture the bishop, which is, there are two ways. You can either go down or you can come towards this side and then capture on the bishop. So we're going to come here, and now we're going to capture on the bishop since we're on the same file or path with the rook. Now the last piece we're going to be capturing is the pawn. So there are two ways. You can pause the video and try to find the two sequence. So first we go either to G5 and then capture on G4, or we could go to E4 and then capture on G4. So any of them works. So we're going to go here, and now we're going to capture the pawn. So that's it, guys. This is how the rook captures. Now, like I said, if there, for instance, is an officer, now the rook can't capture this rook straight ahead because there's a piece blocking its path, which is the bishop. So first we have to get rid of this bishop before we can capture this rook. So if you want to attack any piece and there's something in your path, you have to get rid of that piece first. So now we're going to move on to the next piece, which is the knight. So we all know that the knight moves in an L shape. Now the knight from this square is attacking how many pieces? So first let's point out the squares that the knight can go to. The knight can go here because this is an L. Remember, you move two steps and take a turn. So this two steps, 1, 2, then we take a turn. So we're attacking the rook, and we're also attacking the bishop over here. Now also we can do 1, 2, and then take a turn. So we're attacking this piece here. So the knight can, from this square, can go here, can go here, can go here, although there's no officer there or piece there. It can go here, here. It can also come, it can come here and it can come here, and lastly here. So the knight can move to 8 squares, if you can remember from our last video, from the center of the board. So now let's start with the rook. So we're going to capture the rook, and now the next piece we want to capture is the bishop. So it's going to be very easy. There are a lot of ways there are 2 fast ways you can capture the bishop in 2 moves, which is either you go back to where you were before, or you can come here. So any of them works. So you either go to D3 or you go to D7, and then you can capture the bishop on E5. So let's go to D3, and then we capture the bishop. And now from this square, can you point out the piece that the knight is attacking? So the knight is attacking the queen right away, so we can actually capture the queen. Now we have the task of capturing the pawn on D4, which won't happen in just 2 moves. It will take at least 3 moves to capture the pawn. So can you pause and find the right sequence of moves to capture the pawn? Okay, so first your knight wants to come here, right? And then your knight wants to come here. That way it's going to be attacking the pawn, right? So another way you can picture it is, you can picture the pawn and look for the possible squares. You can picture the pawn, right, and look for the possible squares that the knight can be attacking the pawn. So firstly is this square. This square can put the pawn under pressure, this square, and you're going to find a bunch of squares. So well, you find one that is much more closer to the knight, of which is this, and more closer to the pawn. You find one that is more closer to the pawn, and these are the squares that are much more closer to the pawn. So which is the fastest route? So you can actually go here, and you can capture, right? You can go here, and you can go here, and you can still capture. So that's another way to do it. So well, once you're directly diagonal to a piece, and once you're directly diagonal with your knight to any piece, you can attack it on the next move. That's like the rule. So the knight is the only piece that can actually jump over pieces. So now we're going to capture this. Now we want to capture the pawn on B6. So how are we going to do that now? You can also try to give yourself a task. So firstly, it's going to take 3 moves. Now we could go here, here, and then here. Simple, right? Or not too simple. Right, so this is the fastest route. You can also go here, then here. Then you still arrive at this same square, which is here, and all still put pressure on the pawn. So let's go here, here, and you can also come here. This is another move that you can do. So there are a lot of ways there are a lot of routes you can actually take to attack the pawn. And this is very, very important to take note of, because especially when you advance, you are going to be having lots of options. But when you are doing your calculation, you find out that only one option is the best, and you have to calculate it in the right system or the right order so you can find the best moves. And now the knight captures the pawn. And now the knight is meant to capture the pawn on F2. So how can the knight capture the pawn on F2 in just 4 moves? So you can pause the video and try to find a route. Mind you, there are different routes that you can take to actually capture the pawn. So even if it's not the one that I state in the video, just feel free to put your own rounds on the comment section. So the first move is knight to c4. Then you could go knight to c4. Then you could go knight to d2. And then you could go knight to e4, putting pressure on the pawn. So you notice it took 1, 2, 3, 4 moves to actually capture the pawn. So let's move it. Knight here, 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 and finally recapture. So this is how the knight moves. Now the knight is one of the most complicated pieces, like I said earlier on, and it's going to be very difficult for you to actually fully understand and fully be able to picture the movement of the knight from your head. So there's some exercises that you can do to actually get used to the knight. So you can place the knight on the board, right, and just try to bring the knight to any of these squares, right? So try to take the knight to any of these squares, look for the fastest route possible, and you can do this once you get used to it. You can try doing it without looking at the board if you are very good with the squares and the notations, although maybe that will be something that you consider doing later. So but just try moving the knight on the board while you're looking at the board. You can try moving the knight to these squares, and then you find like you now be once you can move the knight to every possible square on the board, then it's going to be very easy for you to move the knight any way you want to. Lastly, the knight, like I said, is the only piece that can jump over pieces. So for instance, let's say there was a pawn here, right? And there was a pawn here. You can actually jump with the knight and capture this pawn, right? So not minding that there's a pawn here, it doesn't matter. So the knight is the only piece that can actually do this. Aside the knight, there's no other piece that can jump over other pieces. And that's one of the special features of the knight. Now, let's look at the bishop. So the bishop, like we said, can move in an X. Moves in an X shape. So the bishop from here can move all the way here, right? The bishop can move here. The bishop can move here. So this is how the bishop moves in an X shape. So there are two bishops, one on the dark square and another one on the light square. So but for this example, we're just going to be using one, which is the one on the dark square. So I'm going to place some bunch of pieces on the dark square, and you're going to be using the bishop to trace them down. So the bishop from here can capture how many pieces? So this is 1, right? This is 2. So there's no piece on this diagonal, and there's also no piece on this diagonal. So we could start with any of these two. So let's start with the rook on f6. This is f6. So let's start with the rook on f6. So bishop captures f6. So this is how the bishop captures. Don't forget, when you want to capture, you always land on the square that the pieces is, not like checkers where you cross over the piece. Right, so next we're going to be capturing this rook because the bishop is attacking the rook. And now next we're going to be capturing this rook because the bishop is attacking that rook. Right, and now the bishop is not attacking any rook at the moment, and now the bishop is not attacking any rook at the moment, as you can see. So we need to attack a rook. So now if you want to attack, you come either here. Now you're attacking this rook. If you wanted to attack the rook on c7, which is this rook, instead you can come here. You're attacking the rook on c7, right? So if you want to attack the rook on f2, you guess where you're going to go? Exactly, you're going to go bishop to c3, and now you're attacking the rook on f2. So let's start with this. Now we're attacking the rook on a5, and now we can capture Next, we're going to capture the rook on c7. And now if we want to attack, we can come here, or we can take the shorter route by coming here. And now we're attacking the rook, and then we can capture. So this is how the pieces actually, so this is how the bishop captures. Next, we're going to be looking at the queen. So the queen moves both the same way the rook moves, and also the bishop, so it can move both vertically, horizontally, and even diagonally. So now this is a position of where the queen can attack. So now, like I said, the queen moves in a star shape. The queen moves in a star shape, which means both vertically, horizontally, and diagonally. And the queen can move from, as long as there's no piece on its path, right? So the queen can move anywhere as long as there's no piece on the path. So the queen can't go to this square, because why? The queen can't land here. Reason is because there's a pawn blocking it. So if it wants to get here, it has to capture this pawn first before coming here. And the queen can't also go to h4 because there's a pawn over there. So now let's capture the pieces using the queen. So queen can capture here, right? Now we know that the queen can move like the rook, and the rook moves straight, so it can also capture this knight. The queen can also capture here, right? So you can see now the queen moves diagonally too, not only vertically or horizontally. So we can capture the bishop and the knight. So it's your choice. So let's capture the knight. And now we captured the knight. Next, we're going to capture the pawn. We're going to capture this pawn. Now we're going to come here. Reason is we want to attack this pawn. So we capture the pawn, and next we want to attack the bishop. So we could come here. And now if we come here, we can then capture the bishop. So this is how the queen moves. And that's basically all about it. Now the king moves one step at a time, if you remember. So we're going to place some pawns here and here. So how can the king capture these pieces? All right. So how can the king capture these pieces? So the king can come here, right, attacking the pawn. Now if the king captures, if it wants to attack the pawn here, it has to move one step, which is here. And now he's attacking the pawn. So he can come here. And now how can we attack the pawn on f3? We move one step. We can either go here or here. Any move, or here. Any move attacks the pawn. And now we capture the pawn. And now we capture the pawn. Next, we want to attack this pawn. So it's going to take some couple of moves. Remember, one step at a time. So come here. Next, we're going to come here, and then we're going to capture. So this is how the king moves and captures. King captures one step at a time. Don't forget. And lastly, we're going to be looking at how the pawns capture. So this is how the pawns capture. So the pawns capture diagonally, right? So meaning that if there's any piece directly one step diagonal from the pawn, it can actually capture. So it can actually capture this, or the pawn over here can capture this pawn here. So you can only capture diagonally with the pawn. You can't capture by moving forward. You only capture that even though the pawn moves forward. So it's funny how unlike the other pieces capture in the way they move, the pawn doesn't capture the way he moves. So the pawn captures diagonally. Don't forget, the pawn captures diagonally. So in our next class, we're going to be looking much more further into capturing and how pieces capture. I just did a very simple breakdown so you can understand how these pieces capture. It's very simple. Although I didn't do it in a very realistic way where your opponent moves, right? So we just moved our pieces and tried to capture all of the other pieces. So in the next video, we're going to be doing a more detailed, lecture on how you can actually capture pieces, and also how you can avoid being attacked and captured. So see you in the next class.